If you look at Lewis this year, Lewis is very new to the team. Relationship with his engineer is very fledgling, and that's where it can be not healthy. You can't allow emotion to be part of your decision making. Ferrari is like a religion. When you work for Ferrari or you drive for Ferrari, you're playing for the national team. There's a massive amount of pressure.
2006, Felipe Massa. You get a call from someone at Ferrari asking you to go and meet him.
Who is the daddy of Brazil? Well done, son. Great.
Never fear a storm.
Be ready to adapt.
The skill is staying true to ourselves.
Rob, welcome to High Performance. It's nice to see you again.
It is lovely to see you, Jake, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Not only is it nice to see an old friend who I used to spend a lot of time with, but I can't wait for people to hear this conversation because you were central to one of the most dramatic ends to a Formula 1 title race ever.
Yeah.
You've got first-hand experience of working with Michael Schumacher, first-hand experience of working alongside Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen. You've suffered heartbreak in your personal life and in your professional life. You've had the greatest of highs. You've helped to transform Williams in the last few years. And I want to talk about all of it. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Let's do it.
But I want to start by rewinding the clock right back to 2006, where you had not spent any time, I don't think, with Felipe Massa. And you get a call from someone at Ferrari asking you to go and meet him. Take us to that moment.
So Felipe joined us. I kind of knew Felipe. I'd watched him come on the scene, and I met him in, I think, 2001, when he was just, he hadn't quite graduated to Formula One. So I kind of knew him to say hello to. And then he came to Ferrari, and he did, I think, the first 4-5 races with very competent engineer who'd had a really good run with Rubens Barrichello called Gabriele Delicoli, who's a mate of mine. Very good engineer, had a great career in Formula One, but it felt like they weren't gelling.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you have a great relationship and a great working partnership with one driver. It doesn't mean to say it's going to work with another driver. And what happened was, so Ross Brawn, who was my boss, we both still lived predominantly in the UK, and we used to get the Monday morning flight back. So this was after like the 5th race of Imola, and Felipe had 5 really bad races. And Ross was giving me a lift back from Bologna Airport. So Ross always used to park his car there. So he was driving me from Bologna Airport to the factory in Maranello. And we just used to chit-chat, mostly about work, but sometimes it would be about other stuff. And then he said to me, like, what do you think of Felipe? And I said, well, you know, I think he's struggling, but whatever. And he said to me, he just come out and he said, well, we want you to be his race engineer. And I said, okay, like this is like fairly, like it feels like a natural conversation in the car, but he's, and I thought, well, is he telling me or is he asking me? And it felt more like he was telling me. But he was very honest about it. He said, we think Felipe is very talented. You know, Michael had already started talking internally about whether or not he was going to retire within the next year, 2 years, 3 years or whatever. So they had to start succession planning. We think Felipe is very talented from what we've seen up to now. But if he carries on like this, he's not going to make the end of the year. So he said to me, so he kind of arrived in Maranello, he said to me, just have a think about it anyway. And then literally about half an hour later, he called me, he said, well, have you thought about it? Like, okay, I guess you're telling me. So I said, well, yeah. I said, I'll do it. I said, it's a little bit in at the deep end. When do we start? He said, well, go home and get your passport because we're going to Nürburgring this afternoon for the Formula One race. So that's kind of how it came about. And I kind of had the plane journey over there to think about it, right, which is all of like 2 hours, and think about how I was going to approach it. And I didn't really have any idea about how this would go down. So they'd already told Gabriele that he wasn't going to be the race engineer anymore and that I was going to get drafted in. which I felt bad about, right? That's like kind of, I'm in a situation that I didn't ask to be in, and this is a guy that sits like in the same office as me. Anyway, I arrive at Nürburgring, and then Felipe arrives. This was the Wednesday, and then Felipe arrives, and I went to see him in the motorhome, and I found this, the little bit that I knew him, he was like, a little bit I knew of him up to that point, he was like this cheeky chappy, right? He was like happy-go-lucky, and we didn't have that version of Felipe. We had a really like uptight and nervous version of Felipe. And we just had a really honest conversation, right?
And how were those nerves like showing themselves to you?
Oh, he was like all over the place. He couldn't smile. He was like, his foot was tapping. He was like not in a very good place. And I said to him, look, like, what do you want to get out of this? Like, what are you trying to get out of it? Let's start from that. Like, what's the target here? And he said to me, well, I want to beat Michael. I said, okay, that's an interesting... That's an interesting target to have. You got a 7-time world champion, a guy who's like, I guess Michael was like 35, 37, something like that at the time, like massively experienced, de facto best driver in the world at that point in time. I said, okay, you've just like you've gone from Sauber to Ferrari test team, back to Sauber, and now you've kind of gone from, in Formula One, in motorsport, there is Formula One and everything else. And in Formula One, in terms of the expectations, there's Ferrari and everything else. Ferrari is like a religion. If when you work for Ferrari or you drive for Ferrari, you're playing for the national team. Yeah. So I was like, mate, you've got to, we need to bring this down a notch or two. Because I think if that's your expectations right now, here, today, this weekend, we're not going to get very far. This is like, I think we got to go back to basics. And that was it. We went back to basics. I said, look, I believe in you. I think you are really, from what I've observed from the outside, I think you're a really quick driver. And, I'd been doing Formula One for nigh on 10 years at that point. So I guess I knew a little bit about Formula One. I wasn't by no means an expert. And I said to him, as long as the speed's there, we can work with you, right? We can do everything else, but you're nowhere near a complete driver. You haven't got any of the attributes that you need.
And what were they that you didn't have in your eyes? He
couldn't put a race together. He was no good around the in and out laps. He couldn't read a race. He couldn't look at a race and think, I need to extend the tires a little bit, or I need to push this set. He had no idea about how to use the tires. He'll probably listen to this and hate me for it, but he's like a little brother to me, so I'm going to be really honest. He just didn't have all of this, and all this stuff outside the car as well. Like I talk about pressure, there's a massive amount of pressure in Ferrari to deliver outside of the car. You are a national hero, right? And that brings with it a weight. So I was like, look, we can do all of that as like engineers, as your support team around you. We can do all of that as long as the talent is there. But let's get back to basics and let's start to do things in a really structured way. And that was it. We just added structure and gave, the world didn't really operate around targets and KPIs and stuff like that back then. We were less objectively driven, but we just put targets in place of what we wanted to do race by race. And I think having someone believe in him and tell him that it was going to be okay, I think just brought the whole thing down and allowed him to perform. And I said, look, we just need to get through the weekend. Let's get through the weekend. We've got no time to prepare for this, but this is what we need to do during this weekend. And in fact, he became very, very good at execution. Like he became unbelievably good at execution. We used to call him the mechanical monkey because, you'd ask him to do something. Fast forward 2 years from that point, you'd ask him to do something and he's as good as Michael at doing it, right?
An example?
An example is like, a switch sequence in the car. So you're doing 200 mile an hour and upshifting and downshifting, and you've got to do a certain switch sequence and you've got to do certain things with the car. And he could do it all. He could memorize it all, much better than an average human being like me. he could do it at the level of what Michael could do. And he started to get, much more into the detail and understand much more about what was going to make him a complete driver. And actually that first weekend in Nürburgring, we went through the program. I don't think he'd been, he hadn't approached the weekend programmatically before. So we went through the program and he actually finished third. So it was his first podium in Formula One. I think Michael won it. I can't remember who was second. And he finished third. And what I can remember very clearly about that result was that Kimi Räikkönen, who was in the McLaren, had caught him and was much faster than him at the end. And we just talked him through those final 10 laps. And you could see him starting to make mistakes. And then it was like starting to talk him through it and starting to get him, telling him to breathe and telling him it was, where he needed to push the car, where he could conserve the tyres. And he got through it and finished on the podium. And I remember it was really quite a proud moment for me, and the team that had kind of all come, there's not just a race engineer on the car, there's a whole team behind that you have to manage. So it was nice. And then we just started to build from there.
And I'm really interested in that final few laps because you've only really had, 48 hours of intense time with Felipe. Yet you've somehow worked out that what he actually needs you to be saying with a few laps to go is, right, just take a breath. I mean, I'm assuming these are the kind of things you're saying. Take a breath, just stay calm. We've got 3 laps to go. You broke a bit early into this corner last lap, so just think about that. Or where did you get the thought from that was what he needed, or was this you operating on instinct? Do you think?
Instinct. It's pure instinct at that point, right? You don't know the guy, but you can see what he needs. You can kind of see from the body language of how he responds. And I still, do that with people now. You see very quickly how they respond. I think any kind of leadership involves, you've got the old adage that you've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, right? Listen to people, but not only listen to them, really listen to them. 80% of communication is listening and watching their body language to how they react to what you say. And you could see already what worked and what he needed. But yeah, it's instinct, I think. I didn't know the guy from Adam at that point. It's instinct, and it's kind of seeing how he reacts. Like when you tell him something when he's in the car and he's got all of that pressure, how does he react to how you're talking to him? And it was just guiding him through it, and then we became quite. We were a partnership that I would say was quite verbose. We talked a lot on the radio. It was thankfully back in the day when the radio wasn't played out every 2 minutes like it is now. So you could have much more frank conversations. But we did talk a lot. I talked to him probably more than I'd talked to any driver before or after. And he needed that. He needed a lot of coaching and enjoyed a lot of coaching. And I think it really helped him.
And little did you or Felipe know at that moment that this was the beginning of 2 people that would end up in Brazil in 2008 as central players to one of the most remarkable Formula One stories of all time, when Lewis Hamilton wins the world title on the final corner of the final lap of the final race of the season.
Yeah.
But if we go back 3 or 4 days when you're making your way to Brazil, which of course is also Felipe Massa's home race, what was the mood inside the Ferrari camp like? You were behind in the world title, so did you turn up believing that you could be world champions that weekend?
Well, I think we went into the penultimate race with the hope that we could kind of close the gap. And I don't think we did close the gap. I can't remember exactly what happened, but we ended up with a reasonable gap. I don't know what it would be in today's money, but it was like a 15-point gap that we went in today's money that we went into the final round with. There's a few things leading up to that point which had meant that we'd had a good season, but we hadn't had a perfect season.
Yeah.
I think that overall he had, performed very, very well. He'd performed like a world champion. And we're, from that Nürburgring story in 2006 to the end of 2008, we're talking about 3 years, and we had a complete driver on our hands. And so we went into that final race, I think
7 points behind.
7 points behind, right? So 7 points
in a period where you got 10 for the win.
Where you got 10 for the win. Yeah. That's right. So I think we had to finish. Felipe had to win, and Lewis had to finish 6th or worse. So if he'd finished 5th, he was world champion. So obviously that's a massively tall order, right? Yeah. Because even if Felipe wins by a country mile, Lewis is probably just going to canter in behind him in second and get, 2-point deficit back in those days. And what I saw was that of the team that worked on Felipe's car, there was despondency. And I thought that it was my job to kind of lift the team back up and give them confidence.
And when did you see that despondency?
I think we were on a roll and things were going okay, but the gap was just too big, and I saw it like probably a couple of weeks before we actually flew out to Brazil. So what I did was I took all of the guys out. I used to do this quite often. So the engineers, the mechanics, technicians on the car, stuff like that. So we all went out. And we had a really good night. We had dinner and a really good night, and we got very drunk on Lambrusco. But part of that was to tell everybody, look, we can do this, right? It's not impossible. It's like he only has to finish 6th. Like anything can happen. We'll go there, right? We're going to go there. We're going to treat it like any other race, but we're going to win, and we are going to go there with, outward confidence that we can do this, and we all have to believe that we can do this. And then what McLaren do, we can't control. But if we go there and we're very confident, and we start to, have a really good weekend from the get-go on Friday, that starts to put, it's McLaren's to lose at this point. And actually, the weekend unfolded like that. I would say that was literally one of the most perfect weekends I've ever done in any team in Formula One. We were fastest in all the practice sessions. The car setup was almost perfect. We didn't have to choose anything. He qualified on pole. I think Lewis had qualified. He didn't have a great qualifying. He was 5th or 7th. And again, why was that? That was down to pressure, right? There's no way that car should have qualified 7th. This was his first world championship. Let's not forget. So he had a lot of pressure on himself, and then come the race. The race was one of those races where you have to have such fast footwork. It was wet, dry. It was horrible. It was all over the place. And between Felipe and the team, we never really put a foot wrong. When we had the right tyres on, made the pit stops at the right time, he was constantly in front. And then you've got those final few laps when it started to rain again. And Lewis, I think at that point, he spun on the first lap, I think, and that put him on the back foot. Then he made his way up. Then there was more problems and everything. We were just kind of going away at a canter. Was
there a moment in that race where you thought, oh my goodness, we're going to do this?
No, I never allowed myself to think that, because I think that means that you've lost focus on the job at hand.
Yeah.
My job was to help Felipe win that race dominantly. And the more dominant we were, and the more out of reach we were, that would the only tool we had in our armory against our rival at that point was what we had control of, which was winning, and how much pressure that could put them under. And they didn't have a great race. I can remember that. And I can remember just being fully focused. And people kept talking to me on the pit wall about it. And I kept...
What sort of stuff were they saying?
Exactly that. We could do this. We might do this. And I kept politely, in northern vernacular, telling them to...
Fuck off.
Fuck off, yeah. Shut the fuck up. I'm doing my job. Thanks for allowing me to swear.
So your message to Felipe before the race was also don't think about McLaren, don't think about Lewis.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Act like they're not there, because it's, act like they don't exist, right?
But did you not see a moment where you looked at Felipe in the build-up and thought, man, he is also feeling the pressure here big time?
No, never. That was the thing with him in Brazil. He was so comfortable, right? He was so comfortable from the very first second of free practice one. He was so calm. That's what I talk about. We had the complete driver. We had the complete package by that point. On the grid, it looked like he was going out for a Sunday drive. You know, you could see everybody else on the grid, like, you know, the closest rivals, they were feeling the pressure. And we were walking around with smiles on our faces. We were like, well, we're here to lose, right? We're going to lose the World Championship. Like, we're just going to have a good time. You know, outbound. That was the outward message. Obviously, by that point in the weekend, everyone was like, we might do this. Yeah. We could possibly do this. And there was just a self-belief, you know, that he had. It was a confidence, never arrogance, right? There's two, you know, arrogance comes with, like, there's usually no foundation. It's a superficial thing. Confidence is because you know there's solid foundations. I can be confident in what I'm doing. And he had that. Even on the, you know, like I said, on the grid, like, it was like a football stadium. Like, honestly, Sao Paulo, Interlagos, that weekend was like a football stadium. They were just singing and cheering his name, you know, for hours on end, literally hours. I got there at, say, like 8 o'clock in the morning. The grandstands were already full. And they just sung his name for hours and hours and hours on end, right throughout. It's literally like being at a football match.
But that would break some people. That would break some drivers.
Yeah, he got, like, power from it and motivation from it. You know, he felt like that lifted him, right? Because he's a very proud Brazilian, like a very proud like countryman, and I think that. You know, and we couldn't have done really any more. I always look back on that and say, like, and people say, oh, you lost the World Championship. I said, well, yeah, but we didn't lose it in that race. That race was the most perfectly executed weekend that I've ever been involved in any, you know, and seeing Michael win World Championships. We used to, like, you know, back in the, like, you know, 2003, 2004, those years, we were knocking World Championships out like candy, right? We were wrapping the World Championship up by the summer break. But this was just really perfectly executed under pressure. And then you got those final few laps and the disarray of, like, you know, the rain coming down, and then, like, you know, Lewis was on the right tyres and he came through and beat Timo. What I can remember about those final laps is that Felipe crossed the line, and at that point, around turn 11, Lewis was still behind Glock. And at that point, the team started to go mental, right?
There's those iconic images in the garage, isn't there?
Yeah.
Of Felipe's dad and the team celebrating
all of
the
that
world title.
And they were all going mental. And it was very dark. I can remember that. I distinctly remember it was very dark, and I could feel the flash bulbs behind me, you know, like popping off. And, you know, there was a lot of, like, melee. And I was still trying to focus on these final few moments because I knew that Lewis was on the right tyre compared to Glock, and I'm still trying to focus. And what happened was people jumped on me and kind of, like, pulled me off the pit wall, but I still had my headsets on and my cans and everything, and I was going, get the fuck off me, like, I'm still working, like, I like, get off
because they thought they'd won the world title, because they were trying to celebrate,
and I was trying to watch the GPS of, like, where the two dots of between Lewis and Timo were, and they pulled me so far back that, you know, Interlagos is like where if you kind of look to your right, you can see the pit entry as they come up the hill to the start-finish line. And they pulled me back, and I kind of looked down the pit lane, and I thought, right, I can't see the TV anymore because they've, like, ripped me away from the pit wall. But I thought I can look down the pit lane, and I was looking, and I thought I just need to see which car's in front, because probably whatever car's in front is gonna, you know, is whether we've won the World Championship or not. And I saw the silver car come past first and then Timo behind. And I was like, we haven't won it. And people were still going, we won. I was going, no, we haven't. And then everybody realised, and then kind of the mood changes in a split second. And then I kind of climbed back up on my perch and I started to talk him around the in-lap.
What did you say?
No, then I just said to him, you know, we've done, like, you know, the synopsis of the message was, paraphrasing the message was, look, we couldn't have done any more, right? In this event, we've done everything we possibly can. You should be, like, extremely proud of yourself. We are extremely proud of you. It wasn't that one race, and whether or not you've got a, you know, another World Championship trophy or your first World Championship trophy in his case, I guess in the annals of time it becomes a bit meaningless. It was the journey for me, you know, and I talk about this a lot now, even to the guys that I work with now, like, enjoy the journey, right? You've got to enjoy the journey. If it's all about the destination, you'll be miserable. And actually enjoying the journey usually gets you to the destination. So, you know, we talked about that, and then, you know, I think the way that what always struck me and told me that we did have a complete driver and an elite athlete at that point was the way that he reacted afterwards. You know, if you look at him on the podium and how, you know, the humility that he showed.
You know, there was a point a little while ago where I looked at all the supplements in my kitchen cupboard, and my wife laughs about this even now, and she's like, what has happened here? And honestly, I didn't realise that all of the supplements that I was taking had got so complicated. But I think it's because I was trying to be a dad, trying to be a partner to Harriet, trying to run a couple of businesses, trying to find time to host this podcast. And I suppose really what I needed was less things in my life and just a few things that actually work. And I think there's a myth that I'd like to debunk at this point, right? It's that high performance doesn't mean trying to chase everything. It doesn't mean finding every hack. It doesn't mean squeezing more into every single day. Sometimes the best performers, and they've told us this when they've been in this studio, they just prioritize simplicity. They only master the fundamentals. And to be honest, I think I've learned this the hard way through trial and error. And I think I now realize that nothing is more fundamental than fueling your body with the right nutrition. And I believe this helps. Vitals by Heights is nutrition without the noise. Just 2 capsules, 6 seconds, 0 effort. And in here, all the essential nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the healthy fats that are designed to power energy, focus, recovery, and sleep. So we're talking about no mixing, no nonsense, just everything you need in the right doses. And I think if something takes longer than about 10 seconds, I'm out. Luckily, this takes about 6, so you're fine. So why don't you strip your health routine back and just focus on what matters? Head to heights.com/Jake or enter code HP20 at checkout for 20% off your first month. I promise you, I believe this stuff really works. So if you're thinking about attending a World Cup match next year, my advice, do it properly. Choose a host city that gives you more than just the matches. And I know exactly the city because Seattle lives and breathes soccer, from their record-breaking crowds for the Sounders to the fan culture that I think is so important, and it fills the streets there on match day. The passion in Seattle for football is undeniable, and it's about to hit a whole new level with the World Cup. And what I love especially about that city is how close everything is together. So the stadium is right next to downtown, so you can walk from a world-class football venue straight into the heart of the city. The weather there is incredible, lovely, mild summer days that you will just love. Nature is everywhere. There's Puget Sound, sparkling waters. There's mountain views on the horizon. It kind of feels to me when you're in Seattle, I don't know whether you've been, but like the city's DNA is related to the outdoors. And then when you want to refuel, honestly, the food and the drink in this place is next level. Legendary coffee, fresh seafood, cozy wine tasting rooms. They've got craft breweries. They've got really cool, like unique bars tucked away in their historic neighborhoods. And all of it is in walking distance. It's so easy to turn a game into a full city experience. I'm very much planning on going. And if you are too, discover more at visitseattle.org and start planning your perfect summer of football. And I suppose I watched that at the time thinking, I knew I was coming into the sport, didn't I, the next season. So this was me watching it thinking, well, I need to know what's happening here because I'll be talking about this with people like you in a few months' time. But I remember watching that thinking, that's the public display. What happens when the silence arrives and the door closes and the two of you are sitting there in a quiet driver's room and the actual dawning realization that you were seconds away from a world title actually appears?
Yeah, well, I didn't see him for quite a long, relatively quite a long time afterwards that afternoon. And what I found...
Because he had lots of media commitments and things.
Well, yeah, he had tons of... He was on the podium and then he was here, there, everywhere. And what I found was that I started to feel like really emotional, which I hadn't really done at work before. I'm not really a person that gets particularly emotional. But then what I found was that I kind of went and sat somewhere and I cried for about an hour, literally cried for about an hour, and it was just a weird feeling, I called my wife and I talked to her and, I called my dad and I talked to him and I literally couldn't stop crying. And what I realized a long time afterwards, when I was a little bit more self-aware, was that you don't, when you're in a dogfight like that, and it's only sports where this is relevant. I don't think it's relevant in the business world. I think sport is a crucible of pressure, like elite sports is a crucible of pressure. And I think you can't allow, when you are trying to perform at the very highest level, you can't allow emotion to come into it. You can't allow emotion to be part of your decision making. You have to, of course, like be empathetic and, all of those things. But you can't allow emotion to come into it. So, I think it was just pent up, 10 months of a world championship, pent up emotion. We knew we went into that world championship with a good chance of winning. And therefore, from the get-go, from the time, the lights went out in Australia at the start of the season, 18, 20 races later, whatever it was, it's just a huge amount of emotion, and it all come out in that hour. And then I was fine. I can't remember what we did afterwards. I went to see him, and he was, I think again, the overriding sense for him on that afternoon was he was just incredibly proud, right, of what he'd been able to do himself. And there was why I love Felipe and why we've remained, such close friends all this time afterwards, was that even then, at that point, he was well regarded to be one of the top drivers in Formula One. But hubris never crept in. There was never any hubris. There was always a humility about him. There was always this, what all elite sportsmen need is this confidence, but with a nagging self-doubt, the imposter syndrome that we all have. And that's what he kind of he maintained that from that day onwards. And I think again, like his emotions were, of course, he was very emotional, and I would. I comforted him when I finally got to see him.
He was crying as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Same, probably the same thing as me. He'd carried that. Buried those emotions for 10 months, because you can't allow them to come out. You can't, whatever. It's not a weakness. That would be absolutely the wrong way to describe it. But it can cloud your judgment. So, and he was, in quite a bad state. But then we went out and got pissed, and it was fine. We took the team out. We all had a few beers, and, same thing as you would after any kind of celebration. There was a lot to celebrate. There was more to celebrate than, and I think this is about enjoying the journey. There's often more to celebrate than there is not to celebrate. And if you don't celebrate moments like that in your life, coming within 1 point of a world championship with a driver that 3 years previous, his employer was considering whether or not to keep him as employed, when there was people in the paddock that give this guy no hope whatsoever. There was a journalist who, to me, once off camera, once described him as a rock ape and said he wouldn't win a Grand Prix back in very early 2006. And I said, we'll see. Wow. That's we'll see whether that's true or not. This guy, but for a couple of meters more or less in a race, would have been a world champion. So that was just it was a proud moment of what we were able to do.
And look, I hope you don't mind me mentioning at this point your daughter Minnie, who you'd lost in 2007.
Yes.
And since then, obviously, your wife Lucy and you have done a lot of work to raise awareness and funds for stillborn children. I wonder the impact that had on you in this moment, because it probably provided a reminder that there are much bigger things in life anyway than winning and losing world championships.
I think you're absolutely right, Jake. I think that's what I think you kind of grow up, you go to school, you go to university, or you go to work, whatever it is, you meet someone, you get married, until, and this probably sounds, I don't want to sound pious here, but until you have kids, yourself, you kind of just that kind of flips the switch for me for when you grow up. Because all of a sudden now you've got dependents and responsibilities and all the rest of it. And I think going through that tragedy and losing Minnie really brought like a kind of focus, but also a kind of calm to my life. It put things in perspective that, you know, up until that point it had been Formula One, and like, you know, everything was gonna, like, just in the wake of everything just got, like, you know, wrapped up in this wake of Formula One.
Yeah.
And then I kind of, like, that happened and I had to take some time away, obviously. And I have to say, like, I still to this day, like, have to thank Ferrari for how they handled that as well.
Yeah.
You know, Ferrari were unbelievable about it. And that's when you see, you know, talk about like Ferrari as a family and family and all of that, right? Which sometimes it's true, a lot of the times it isn't true. In moments like that, there was a real empathy and a real circling of the wagons, you know, to look after me and Lucy. But it did put things in perspective, you're right. It did change me as a person. It 100% changed me as a person. It made me grow up overnight. And it made me much more, like I said, like have perspective on things, right? Because at the end of the day, okay, we're living and breathing Ferrari. It's World Championships. We're working or playing for the national team or whatever way you want to look at it. You know, we're in this privileged position. There's 20 drivers. There's 20 race engineers. You know, I've got one of those spots. But at the end of the day, you know, it's not as important as those things, you know, as kids and family and life and death. It's none of those things. And I think that did help me. It definitely helped me to be a better, it helped me to be better at my job because it took a lot of pressure off me. Because up until that point, I'd kind of lived with a lot of pressure. And the pressure went away like that.
Why?
Because I just put it in perspective. Because I didn't, I cared deeply about it, but I could also put it in perspective, and I could also start to quieten out the noise. You know, any high performing team or business, it will operate at its peak under pressure, but it also has to be a psychologically safe space. And I think a psychologically safe space is created by the culture in a business, but it's also created by yourself as well. I think you can create your own psychologically safe space. And in Ferrari, in Formula One in general, or in any elite sports team, it can be very needly, right? You know, you're always on display. People are always looking to you know, if you're on a pedestal, to knock you off it. Somebody younger, more intelligent, better looking, whatever, is going to come and take your place. And kind of all of that just went away, or the majority of it went away, I would say. I wouldn't say all of it went away, but the majority of it went away. I was just like, you know, if I can, in terms of like all of that noise, I don't give a fuck anymore, right? I'm just going to be good at my job, right? And there's going to be noise. Noise will always, like, you know, disruptive noise is always going to be there. And, you know, kind of reacting to it and being, you know, psychologically reactive and cognizant of it, and it affecting your decisions and what you do and how people view you, is a really, really unhealthy way to try and be good at what you're doing, right? Because you spend 50% of your time thinking about that and 50% of your time trying to be actually good at your job. So yeah, it just put things in perspective where I cared deeply about my job, and I cared deeply about performing, and I cared deeply about the people that work for me, and I cared deeply about results and winning races and pole positions and winning world championships. But I didn't care anymore what people thought. It just kind of went away. It just literally went away. And then, like, you know, it tended to zero over the next few years. I think there was another, you know, few years where pressure was still on at Ferrari and all the rest of it. And I think what that does is it also, like, so there's a whole cycle here where, you know, that happened with Mini, that happened to my psychology and the way that I approach things. And then what I started to notice was people like kind of looked at me and they were like, oh, you're in this really important position, but you appear from the outside that, like, you're like, to use the vernacular, you don't give a fuck. And I was like, no, you're very wrong. I just don't care about the things that are unimportant. And then you kind of have to also, like, I don't know, temper your behavior, but temper your external brand, if you like, because people start to look at you and think, is this bloke serious about what he's doing? But I was just enjoying it. I enjoyed all of my time in Formula One until the point that I didn't enjoy it anymore, and then I stopped. You know, it was clear to me, and I always used to talk about people that, you know, I used to work with people and see the amount of pressure that they used to put on themselves. You know, you talk about the pressure of Formula One and the external pressure and, you know, the pressure from the team and all the rest of it. It's like, that doesn't touch the sides for, like, elite, like, for like people who work in elite sports teams. That doesn't touch the sides of the pressure that you put on yourself, right? But the pressure that I put on myself can be a positive pressure, right? I'm not going to put negative pressure on myself. You know, there's the niggling self-doubt and the imposter syndrome and all that shit that everybody has, right? It's so well documented. All of that's just, I think, like, in small doses is healthy.
Yeah.
But the positive pressure that you put on yourself is way, way higher than what anybody else could put. So it's like, don't bother putting pressure on me. Like, don't bother coming with, like, any negativity, because it doesn't matter, right? I can do this myself.
The reason why I thought it was very important, actually, was because also, you know, when you lost your daughter, you were engineering Felipe at the time. So he would have been on the phone to you, wanting to know about your family news. What's going on? Has your daughter been born? Is she healthy? What's her name? And the news you had to give him was, we've lost her. Like, she's not with us. So I think that's a reminder of the fact that actually the relationship between anyone, actually, but I think particularly in your sport, was an emotional one rather than a physical one. I think your job and the job of an engineer for a Formula One driver is to be psychologically there for them as much as from a strategic perspective. Like, where would you put the balance of how much of to be a great race engineer, how much is about working on the brain of a driver and how much is working on the technical skills of a driver?
I think it's honestly 50-50. And I think it's like, from, you know, a little bit that I know the inner workings of other sports, football, rugby, whatever. I think it's always 50-50 when you work with the athletes themselves. You know, you can't have, you know, what is a race engineer in a Formula One team? Effectively, for that driver, he's like the head coach, right? So you can't come and have no idea about, you know, the technical aspect of the job. You know, that's really, really important. That you understand how the car works, how that driver interacts with the vehicle. How do you optimize that whole package? You've got to know all of that. But if you come and you don't understand that you have, you know, a human being in the car and an athlete with all of the foibles that, you know, all of us, you know, mere mortals have, then it's never going to work. You have to work on both, and they have to work on both concurrently, and they both have to work in harmony as well. Yeah. You know, we can't be just off doing, like, the driver psychology or the athlete psychology bit, and the other bit, like, we've forgotten about, and actually the car's quite slow, but we're telling him he's great and, like, he can win races, or, you know, we've completely messed up the strategy or whatever it is. Equally, you can't be fully focused on just that technical side and forgetting about the athlete themselves. So they've got to work in tandem. I guess, honestly, with you know, I talked about 50-50. It might even be slightly higher in Formula One.
On the psychology side? On
the psychology side. Because don't forget, the big difference in Formula One compared to, say, a team sport is that you've got another 10 or 14 players, whatever your sport is, 8 players on the field who are all there. You're there to work as a team, right? As in the athlete, the front of house athlete team. With a Formula One driver, there's one of you, right? And when that driver when the visor goes down, there's an inordinate amount of pressure on that single athlete. It's up to him to deliver as a Formula One driver at that point. The team is behind them; they will support them, but that's the end of the chain where they need to deliver. There's a whole raft, myriad of work of 1,000 women and men that go into that.
Yeah.
But for those 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon, the crucible is fairly in their hands, and they have to deliver. So I think there's times when you have to really ramp up the how you support psychologically the athlete in that moment. And definitely, I was always a race engineer that talked. We talked about this before with Felipe. I would talk him around the lap almost, even in qualifying.
What sort of stuff would you be saying?
Oh, we talk about everything. Not everything. We talk stuff relevant to the race, obviously. But there would be very technical stuff. I would be telling him where he was compared to the plan, if you like. I would be telling him how he needed to manage the tires. I would be telling him how he needed to manage certain corners, whether or not he was braking too early, too late, where to carry more speed, how to extract more performance from the tires, how to save the tires more. Where we were on that particular stint.
How frank would you be with him if he's not delivering?
Oh, black and white.
Like an example, what would you say? He's done a bad lap, he's under pressure, and you would say,
well, I mean, it depends. Are we at the start of, or do we know each other? If
this is when you're fully in bed with each other, you know each other inside out.
I would. You've already sworn, so I'm not going to ask you if I can. But I just say, what the fuck are you doing? Put your head in order. That's not good enough. And here's what you need to do the next lap, and he would turn it on and do it.
On high performance, we often say it's the small things done well, right, that make the biggest difference. And wellness doesn't always come from major changes. Sometimes it's about just upgrading the simple routines that you already do every day. And that's where Bond Charge comes in, a trusted brand known for creating science-backed wellness tools that help with sleep, recovery, and overall performance. And now they've brought that same innovation to something as simple as brushing your teeth. The Bond Charge LED light toothbrush is the only toothbrush that combines sonic power with red and near-red infrared light wavelengths, proven to support healthy teeth and gums. And it's low in radiation, it's easy to travel with, it's got this gorgeous, sleek, matte finish. It makes my teeth feel amazing. And it's a small daily habit reimagined by combining science with something that you do every day. And with over 250,000 happy customers, you can already trust Bond Charge to deliver products that actually work. That's why I use them. And if you want a discount, and use code HP15 to save 15% on everything across the site at bondcharge.com. This episode is brought to you by Volvo and the fully electric EX90. Now, weekends away are a big deal for me and the whole family, and I would highly recommend my home county of Norfolk. And wherever you are, with the Volvo EX90, getting there is effortless. You can load up the kids, the bags, all the weekend essentials with ease. And thanks to the generous boot space and 7 full-size seats, the extra room will make such a difference, especially on those longer journeys. And inside it feels calm. It feels really comfortable. Loads of attention has been paid to every detail. But what I love most is the reassurance. The EX90 is designed to be the safest Volvo car ever made. So wherever I'm heading or you're heading, you know that everyone's protected. The electric range of up to 378 miles means you can reach Norfolk or anywhere else comfortably and still have plenty of charge to explore once you arrive. The intuitive infotainment system keeps music and navigation simple, so by the time we get to wherever we're going, we normally don't want to get out the car. Search Volvo EX90 to find out more. Electric range may vary based on driving behaviour and conditions. See, because I think we don't know this dynamic, right, between driver and race engineer because we don't get to see it. Therefore, what we do see, we think we almost make the wrong interpretation. Like I think of Max Verstappen and Gianpiero Lambiase. The number of times I've seen people say, oh, they obviously hate each other. Oh, they obviously don't get on. Because they're so frank on the radio, particularly Max back to the team. What do you think when you see those type of radio calls from Max? I
think that Max and GP, who are both people that I dearly like. I think they have a great relationship. I think that is the one relationship that I see. It's kind of like an old-fashioned relationship. But don't forget, they've been at it for quite a while now. Since, is it nearly 10 years?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
So it's quite an old-fashioned race engineer and driver relationship. And I think if the perception is that they don't get on, I think the way that they can be that frank and honest with each other tells you exactly the opposite. They get on really, really well. And I think that Max knows that, GP has been a big part of his success.
Yeah.
Of course, he's never going to get the accolades that Max does. And I think, they wouldn't have stuck together for 9 years. What's you're going to be in a ball ache of a relationship, like a professional relationship, for 9 years and carry on? Of course you're not. They get on like a house on fire. And I think you've got to be able to speak frankly to each other. I think if you don't have honesty, especially in the very, very high pressure situations like that, whether it's sport or business or whatever it is, if you don't have that absolute honesty between each other, right, and you're kind of fannying round, like trying to say something but not really saying it, it's just not going to work. It really won't work. And I see this now, like when I listen to, when I watch Formula One races, and I listen to some of the engineers and their drivers talking together, the engineer can be, it's almost like it's too subservient. It's like, get on the front foot, tell them what you want, and I don't hear the whole conversation. So I'm kind of like, listening to this as a fan from the outside. It's like, tell them what you need. Like, they're in a very, very high pressure situation. Like, okay, this is like a superstar. They're paid, tens of millions of dollars a year. They're an elite athlete. They're one of 20 in the world, but now you're at work and you need to deliver for them just as much as they need to deliver for you. And for an engineer to deliver for the driver, you have to be frank, you have to be honest, you have to be open. And I think if you don't have that, even out of the car, Felipe and I would be like very, very frank with him. When he fucked up, I'd tell him he fucked up. Like, it's not good enough, right? What are we doing? And he would do the same with me. Yeah. And sometimes on the radio, like I said, like, thank God, like, not all radio was played like back then. But, he would, quite often, like, tell me to shut up. And I would say, no, you shut up. And like, we get into this argument, like, it's like tete-a-tete.
So when you watch a race and you hear, and Max is the one that everyone talks about when it comes to modern drivers and being blunt on the radio. When you hear him swearing, telling the team it wasn't good enough, questioning the team, you actually look at that and think, that's the sign of a healthy relationship between driver and engineer and driver and team.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, look, like, it's in the heat of the moment. He's driving the car at 200 miles an hour. Giampiero sat on the pit wall, usually air conditioned nowadays. So of course, Max is a winning machine, right? So of course he's going to kind of sometimes overstep the mark. But I know that, I would suspect, because this happened with me at times, I would suspect that he, later on that day when he's out of the car and acting more like a normal human being, there would also be, look, sorry about that, like, perhaps overstepped the mark.
Isn't that healthy as well, though?
Yeah,
like,
and that's the end of it. That's the end of it.
Yeah.
That's the end of it. You know what I mean? You're not going to sit there and bear a grudge. Like, I never did that. When Felipe sometimes, overstepped the mark. And I did it with him, right? We just say, yeah, sorry about that. I was a bit of an arse, but like, whatever, let's just get on with it. And I think that is the sign that you can have an open and honest and really healthy relationship. And you should have that whether or not, it's a race engineer and a Formula One driver, or a head coach and a centre forward, or whether or not it's a CEO and their CFO, right? You need to have that with the team around you. Yeah. Otherwise, what are you doing if you're not honest with each other? If there's always like a little bit of honesty kept back because you don't want to hurt each other's feelings or anything. I'm a great one for frank talking, and I think you have to be frank and open and honest in those situations.
And as someone who knows Lewis Hamilton well, because you battled against him in the peak of his powers, and as someone who knows Ferrari inside out, and arguably from a race engineer perspective, probably better than anyone else on the planet at the moment, when you see Lewis's struggles, and I thought particularly that radio call, do you remember when he said they were trying to work out what to do, and Lewis said, oh, maybe we have a cup of tea while you're at it? Remember, how much do you read there into what that tells us about what was going on behind the scenes? And obviously, Riccardo Amati, his race engineer, has now, stepped away.
Yeah, I think that is definitely, just as we talked about like Max and GP. If you look at Lewis this year, Lewis is very new to the team. The relationship with his engineer is very fledgling. So if you're having those type of comments on the radio, I guess the relationship is not quite fully formed, and that's where it can be not healthy. And I think this is a very clear presentation that his frustrations are boiling over. I do think it's the job of the race engineer, by the way, when the driver asks a question, you need to know enough about the car and be, some level of expertise in all areas and be across your job enough that when the driver asks a question, again, they're in the car on their own, they're driving the car at 200 mile an hour. When they ask you a question, answer it quickly, right? It really pains me when I hear, we'll get back to you and all the rest of it. Mate, it's not a call center. The guy's trying to perform at 10/10 of their performance. Answer him, give him confidence, let them know that you know what you're doing. Otherwise it's like, I'll get back to you. I need to go and ask an adult. And at that point, it's kind of like these are the tiny things that erode confidence and trust, and that's when the relationship starts to become more touchy and more difficult. And how do you get back from that? We're talking about, the guy at Ferrari who's had a very long career in Formula One, very successful, a lot of success in Formula One.
Recommended to Lewis by Sebastian Vettel, wasn't he?
There you go. Great, relationship and career with Sebastian. They won lots of things together. But it's like the Felipe story in 2006. When it doesn't work and it doesn't gel, it doesn't work.
And when it doesn't work, why doesn't it work?
I have a very clear theory on this. I think it's up to the race engineer to adapt their approach and their personality to suit the athlete. I don't think it's the other way around. I think if it's the other way around, the race engineer they haven't really got the meaning of their job or even life. Because it's kind of like, come on, mate, you're the engineer. You're the one who gels the whole thing together, right? You've got this athlete, this driver in the car, who has all the foibles that we have as all as mere mortals have, but they are focused on doing their bit. You have the bandwidth to, they're focused on delivering driving. You have the bandwidth to kind of step back and understand what it is that they need. What is their psychological safe space? How do you create that for them? How do you create a comfortable area, a comfortable zone for them to work in? I think that's the job of the race engineer. So I think when it doesn't work, it's because the race engineer either hasn't recognized it and can't make it work, or they're not prepared to compromise, that far. And just sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
And would Ferrari, would it have pained Ferrari to have gone, look, we've spent a hell of a lot of money on Lewis Hamilton. I mean, 60 million a year is what they're talking about. Would it have hurt them to go and spend another 3 or 4 million and also hire Pete Bonington, who was Lewis's race engineer at Mercedes, and they knew each other inside out, upside down? Yeah,
I don't know the inside story there, and they might have tried to do that, right? I honestly don't know the inside story. They might have tried to hire Pete, and then Mercedes might have given him a counter offer. I don't know.
But he got a promotion, right, when Lewis left. So that makes you wonder whether maybe that did happen.
Yeah, there was probably a little bit of that going on. Yeah. And then Mercedes probably put it to bed. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on there. Does Pete want to follow Lewis and then be attached to Lewis? Because there is a risk of doing that with a driver, because the driver's the driver's tenure in a team can be much more transient than an engineer's. you know. So do you want to wed yourself to a driver, even with that relationship, you know, that longevity of relationship and success that there are? Do you want to do that? And then if Lewis leaves after 1 or 2 years, you are part of Lewis's team, and you're probably not, you know, you've been brought in by the driver. And that's something, it's a little bit like nepotism, right? Fortunately, I've never had to deal with that, but I watch people deal with it, you know, and through no fault of their own at times. You know, if Peter had have followed Lewis to Ferrari, that would have been done purely on merit, right? But there would be a lot of people there that would have thought, and the outside world that would have thought, well, this is kind of just another form of nepotism. And do you want to live with that? You know, is that something that you want? Or do you want to have the headspace just to do like a great job? So yeah, I don't know the inside story there. It wouldn't be something that even though I know you're going to ask me about this probably, it wouldn't be something that I want to do, which is to follow a driver.
Would you not?
No, not really. Not really. I don't think so. I mean, a lot of people think that I followed Felipe to Williams.
I was about to say, but didn't you go to Williams because Felipe went there? That was what I assumed had happened.
No. So what happened was I'd been talking to Williams for about 12 months, and then I finally decided that I wanted to do it. There was a few things that happened that kind of made my mind up. Like on the positive side, on Williams' side.
I said money there. You missed me saying.
Oh, money. I mean, that always helps, right? Yeah. Like, we shouldn't shy away from the fact that always helps. So that was helpful, and there was a few other things, and I thought, okay, the timing is right. It was right for me personally as well at that point, you know, from a family point of view. And so I signed a contract with them, but part of signing the contract with them was that we needed better drivers than what they had. And of course, my recommendation, knowing that he was going to be out of contract the year after, was Felipe Massa. So I actually introduced Felipe to Claire.
He followed you to Williams. You didn't follow him.
He followed me to Williams, desperate to keep the partnership alive, I would say. No, but he followed me. So I can definitely say I've never followed a driver.
And on the subject of him changing teams, I'm very interested in the fact that we don't really understand quite what it would have been like for Lewis to have gone to Ferrari this season. Why can someone who is a 7-time Formula 1 world champion, 8-time world champion in some people's eyes, why would it be such a struggle for him, aside from what we've spoken about, which is that new relationship with his race engineer? Like, why is it so hard to change teams and drive a different Formula 1 car?
Well, I think there's two things going on there from what I can see from the outside, which is, and maybe just talking to people as well. I think there's two things. I think since the hybrid era started, Lewis has been less comfortable with the cars. And you've seen his teammates get a lot closer to him. So, you know, it's still the hybrid era now with this, you know, when he went from Mercedes to Ferrari, it was still the same generation of cars. So I think Lewis was, you know, less comfortable than he's been when he won all of those world titles. And then the other thing is it is a big change in environment. You know, I don't know Mercedes well. I know Ferrari very well, and I know other teams very well. And the environment within Ferrari is very, very different. So there will be, for sure, technical differences, right? The way they approach a weekend, the way that they set the car up, the way that you know, the technical aspects of the operations, all of that will be very different. So straight away you've got something that you are, you know, Mercedes and Lewis were, you know, Mercedes fit Lewis like a pair of old slippers, right? He knew it. It was his team. Everything had been molded around him. Then you go into this team that has this 100-odd year history, where everything hasn't been molded around you. And in fact, there's a very particular way of doing things. So like all of that suddenly feels uncomfortable. Then there is the inordinate amount of pressure that you get, right? You know, it's a great, so
But he's Lewis Hamilton.
He's Lewis Hamilton, but it's still very, very different. It is very different to the pressure that he will have felt in any other team. Right. You know, and I can say that because I've lived it, right? I lived and breathed the pressure of Ferrari. And like we talked about before, you know, when I first went there and in those first years, it was, I felt the pressure a lot. You know, it was overpowering at times. And you see, like, there's very few people who have longevity of career in Ferrari in senior positions because of that, because of the pressure. You see that they just cave. And then we had, you know, like my personal circumstances with like losing Mini, and it all changed for me. And that's how I think that made me survive there for so long. I don't know how Lewis, you know, has reacted to that pressure. And it's not only the pressure, it's not just the pressure, because of course he's an international sports person, as you've just said. You know, he's got, you know, more accolades than, you know, most other drivers could ever dream of, and having lived through like pressure and all the rest of it. But it's also the different way of doing things, and like, how does he communicate with the team? What sort of relationship has he got with the very senior management in the team? You know, the relationship between him and Toto is well documented, right? But what's his relationship now? Now he's got to build a relationship. You know, you're going from something where everything is very comfortable. You don't even have to. I was talking to an old colleague of mine last night down the pub actually about this. You know, when it's been really good in Formula One, you don't communicate, right? You don't have to communicate. Sounds weird, you don't communicate. Communication is like the key to success. You don't have to communicate about the small stuff. Of course you communicate about the bigger stuff, but you know what somebody else is going to think. You know how somebody else is going to react. You know what they're doing, what they're thinking of when there's a group of, you know, 10 to 20 of you that are the architects of, like, you know, the real success in a team. Lewis was part of that at Mercedes. He's now gone into something where he doesn't know any of that. So it's a destabilizing environment. And then there's different ways of doing things and different relationships. As I said, he was uncomfortable. He's been less comfortable with the hybrid, you know, that's documented. You can see it from the results, the hybrid cars.
I also think, you know, when the chairman came out and said our drivers need to talk less, I remember seeing that and thinking, Ron Dennis is never saying that about Lewis Hamilton. Toto Wolff is never saying that about Lewis Hamilton. I think that's the first time in his career that a senior leader in the team he's driving for has come out and been critical of him. Yeah,
and it's destabilising, right?
Yeah.
So you can live with all the pressure, you know, in the world up to that point. But until that happens for the first time, it's a great point, Jake. It's the first time, right? So, and the first time for everything is you got to learn how to cope with things. And how did he cope with that? I don't know, but it's it must be uncomfortable, right? Your boss has basically come out and told you to shut up in public. It was pretty clear that was the message, you know. I can't remember what it was verbatim, but like talk
less and drive more or something like that.
Talk less, drive more.
Think less about talking, more about driving. I'm like, the problem with that team at the moment, I thought this anyway, I don't think it's the drivers. I think you need to look at the car. You know what I mean?
Got two very good drivers.
You haven't got the fastest car on the grid.
No, that's right. They haven't got the fastest car on the grid. And there is, and of course that brings more and more pressure. So how do you deal with that? How do you like keep the team focused and not focused on the negatives? And you know, there's execution mistakes. You know, it's well documented. It's not for me to say. I watch it on a Sunday afternoon and I see it. They're improving in certain areas, other areas less so. So that whole thing creates this environment, especially in Ferrari, where there's the pressure like grows and grows and grows. Yeah. And when you're inside of that, you know, it's difficult to describe what it's like when you're inside of it. You know, I have seen people, very, very good people, and honestly, I can't like say who they are, but very good people who I have a huge amount of respect for, really good engineers, very, very competent, being broken by it. You know, so I guess Lewis isn't impervious to that. Yeah. But the car needs to improve as well. You're right. The car and the team needs to improve. They have got two really good pedalers there. You know, Charles is a superstar. He's always been a superstar. Lewis needs no introduction. He's got, you know, he's a 7-star general. So, you know, there's a lot of work to do there, and I don't think the drivers would be the first place that I was looking if I was running the team.
Before we go back to you and your career, if I could give you one Formula One driver on the grid today to race engineer, who would you choose? Oh, that was a quick. Why?
Because he's just he's my type of driver, and he's just a competitor. That's what he is. He is. You know, like running my own business now. Like, and I like, you know, when you interview people and you know, how much of a self-starter are you? You know, what a ridiculous question. Like, who's going to answer and say, I'm not a self-starter, right? Yeah. I can't do anything. You're going to have to tell me what to do like 24 hours a day. Max is the epitome of somebody who brings his own motivation and drive every hour of every day, right? He is so motivated. He is a winning machine. He wants to win. He is so competitive, right? So there's never any doubt about that, right? Of course, every driver wants to win, but how much can they bring it of every hour of every day? How much can they be motivated to be the best? Not only to be the best, but to put a big gap between me and the next best, right? Because that's what he wants to do. That's his. Somehow he finds that motivation from somewhere. Like the gap to the next best driver on the grid isn't big enough. I need it to be bigger, and I need to outperform myself, and I need to drag the team along. And that is a powerful drug when you have somebody on your side like that, you know, who is so self-motivated. You have to have all the competency and, you know, all the ability and all of that. That's kind of a given, right? You're a Formula One driver. But having that extra edge of, you know, self-belief and being able to motivate yourself and being able to motivate those people around you is you know, that to me is what a complete driver is.
Look how he ended 2025. I mean, like just metronomic, winning everything, complete pressure.
Yeah.
And he shows no signs also of letting up on his desire to be successful, does he?
Yeah, that's it, right? He still wants it. Yeah. He still wants it 110%. He wants it more than anyone else. It's clear he wants it more than anybody else. You know, as much as it'll probably pain the other 19 to hear this, that's why he's so successful, because he gets up every morning and he brings it, right? And he is motivated, and you know, you give him, he's the classic driver that you give him an inch and he'll take a lot more from you, right? And what does that do to all his other competitors? That sets them even further back, right? Because he just keeps going and going and going. I'm sure most of them are looking at him thinking, come on, Max, just have a day off, right? Just one day, please just have a weekend off, so like we can all like do this. But he doesn't, because it's not enough to beat people, right? It's almost to the point where he wants to humiliate people. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean that in a nasty way, but that's what goes through his mind. He is the ultimate competitor, you know. And when I, you know, the question was, which driver would I want as a race engineer? It's him, because that's what I want, because that's how I feel at work, you know. I want to, like, I am to the point of being unhealthy at times in my life. I've had to, like, check myself. I am, like, so unbelievably competitive. You know, everything is a race. Even now, like, you know, as a, you know, in my middle age, right? I'm still, like, everything is still, like, a little competition.
I think even the great Max Verstappen, the way that his form dipped and the team's form dipped in the middle of the 2025 season, after, you know, the departure of people like Jonathan Wheatley and Adrian Newey and all of the social media and media conversations around Christian Horner and Christian leaving, it shows you how important environment is for
100%
for results.
100%. You can be at the absolute top of your game. You can be the best in the world at whatever your chosen thing is. But if you don't have a psychologically safe space, and you don't have honesty, and you can't work as a team, you won't perform. Right? Forget it. Forget it. Whatever your chosen field is, whether you are a Formula One driver, a Premier League footballer, whether you're CEO of a FTSE 100 company, a Fortune 500 company, right? If you don't have all of those things, right, you're not going to perform. Forget it. Especially the honesty bit, right? and was with the whole way that team was shaping up in the middle of the year and everything that happened the year before. Were they all being honest with each other, or were there factions? There's clear factions. They've come out and said it, right? If one thing, Helmut is if he's good for one thing, he's good for honesty, right? And he's come out and told the world about the factions within that team. How can you perform at the highest level when all of that is going on? You know, and of course, even somebody as great as Max Verstappen, he's not able to do it. You know, teamwork, honesty, psychological safe space.
Let's go back to your career. So 2008 comes to a kind of brilliant but also disappointing end. Hugely emotional for you, hugely emotional for Felipe and the whole team. 2009 starts, and I remember, that was my first season hosting F1 for the BBC, and I remember seeing an unreliable Ferrari that was slow, and weird things were happening. I remember there was a moment where you thought you were low on fuel, so slowed the car down, right, and then realised that you weren't actually having an issue with fuel, and ended up speeding up towards the end of the race. Do you remember that?
I can't remember that.
All sorts of stuff was going on. And against that backdrop, we have Hungary 2009, and you've seen this as well. And I was very early in my Formula One career, but the paddock is busy and it's buzzy. I mean, even more so now, but even back then it was busy, but loads going on. And as a member of the media, we were searching for places to watch the coverage, which is a weird thing to say, isn't it? But you can either go back to the production office, which is, where all the producers and everyone were, and watch your own coverage on the television, or you can go into a team motorhome, or you can often stand in the paddock with your own monitor and just watch the sessions. And crashes happen regularly.
Yeah.
And sometimes a crash happens where a silence, I think almost comes from the crowd, right?
Yeah.
They realise it's not a normal accident, and that filters towards the paddock. And I remember this moment actually in Hungary was my first ever experience where David Coulthard and Eddie Jordan, who I was working with at the time, and some of the producers and production team who'd been in Formula One for a long time, I saw were suddenly acting really different. Like we were almost getting ready to go back on air, even though we were in the middle of a session. And I'm saying to the guys, there's half an hour left of this session. What you don't? And they're like, no, I think we might be coming back any minute. And I'm thinking, what's happening? Something strange has happened here. That was my first realization that Felipe being in the tyres wasn't a normal incident.
Yeah.
What was your first understanding that something abnormal had happened?
Well, I mean, so we just started the lap. Well documented, he was following Rubens up the hill. Rubens was in the Braun car. And in fact, we were as much as we were having, as much as the car was an absolute dog, I think for me, the team, in terms of operations, had taken another little notch upwards from 2008. He'd taken another little notch upwards from 2008. So he was consistently performing really well. And I think that was a race definitely which probably suited the car. And I thought that we would probably get a decent qualifying out of it. Even though the car was awful in real terms, he was always inside the top 10 in qualifying. And we just started the lap. I think it was qualifying 2. He just started the lap. He's going up the hill to turn 5. And then it looks to me, because I watch the squiggly lines, right? I watch the TV, but a lot of the time he's not on the TV. Most of the times I'm watching the squiggly lines, the telemetry. So I'm watching the telemetry and I see him start to slow down. It's not an accident. He's kind of slowing down. And I'm like, oh, fuck, the engine's broken or gearbox broken. It's a classic, the car just coming to a stop, but a little bit faster. So I'm looking, and as he's slowing down, I jump on the radio and go, oh, mate, what's happened? There's no response. So then I immediately think, oh, he's pissed off. He doesn't want to talk. He's in the middle of qualifying, gearbox is broke, engine's broke, something like that, right? Doesn't want to talk. And then I kind of see him come to an abrupt halt. The line goes down. So then I'm like, oh, he's crashed. Actually, he wasn't just slowing the car down. Now he's crashed. But he's kind of slowing down. Then he crashes. So I'm like, all right, this is weird. So I was like, what happened? No response. And then we start. So then I'm asking the guys back in the garage. I'm saying, hang on, what's happened here? And one of them says to me, well, going up the hill, he's kind of started to press the brake and started to press the accelerator at the same time. But he's like hard down on the brake and the accelerator. I'm like, oh, this is weird, right? And now, like, this is a completely new situation. You're not understanding anything. And then it shows the in-car camera of him. It flashes to that. Still haven't heard from him. And it shows the in-car camera. And he's got his hands on the wheel, right? He's got his hands on the wheel, but he starts to veer over to the left-hand side of the road. Then he goes over the curbs. Then he goes over, from one side of the track to the other, bounces across the gravel into the tyre wall. I'm like, he's just driven it into the wall, right? His hands are still on the wheel, which is really weird to watch anyway. When you see a driver go into the wall, you'll always see at the very last minute, they'll take the hands off. So we're still like in this state where we've got no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
It's total confusion, right? Confusion from the garage, confusion from me. Nobody knows what's going on. And then at that point, his radio opens. And there was this like awful, like guttural moaning. You know what I mean? Somebody in a lot of pain, like a lot of pain.
And has he had to press the button for the radio to come open at that point?
I don't know. I don't think he's in any fit state. I think he's been fumbling round. He's come to, he's been fumbling round, and somehow he's just out of instinct has pressed that button and he's opened it. He hasn't saying anything. There's just an awful guttural moaning. And like there was this sudden realization that this is not normal. And thankfully what I could do is I could turn his radio off, which going back to later times, like when he sometimes used to annoy me on the radio, I got the radio guys to set it up so I could turn his radio off if he was talking too much. So I turned it off.
Like sort of to protect him?
Yeah, to protect him. Also the team, because the team could all hear it as well. And everybody was like, you know, what the fuck is going on here? And then slowly, it was actually, believe it or not, like I watched the image like so many times and I just didn't see the spring, right? I just couldn't see it. And then it was literally like a couple of minutes later that Flavio Briatore come along the pit wall and he had an image, a still image, and you could just see this blurry thing, like the in-car camera, so up here on the roll hoop, he's driving along, and you could just see this like black image. It was so blurry, and we thought it was a bird, and we were like, oh my God, he's had a bird strike, right? And you start to think, well, it's knocked him out, right? A bird would knock him out, like, because a bird is, you know, it can be a reasonably sized thing, and you know, but thankfully it's kind of made of cells and flesh and stuff like that, so it's going to kind of make a mess of his helmet and be a big impact and knock him out. And then it started emerging that maybe something had come off Ruben's car, and then it came out that, you know, all of this is going on, that actually it was the third spring off the rear suspension. 800 grams, a kilogram, something like that. We were like, oh my God. And then the image came out. There's a very famous image of when he gets out the car and his helmet is like completely destroyed down this left-hand side, visors up, and you can see like he's in complete.
And did you see
shock.
that image then at the time that it was happening?
No, we couldn't see anything. They put the...
So you're still really unawares whilst they're working on him and the medics are with him?
No idea.
You've had no information?
No idea whatsoever. And then he got taken to the medical centre. They sedated him. They give him a tracheotomy, like all of that type of stuff. And they airlifted him out. And we really had no idea, absolutely no idea. And then like me and like the performance engineer on his car were not really in any fit state to work. So they took us to the hospital, but there wasn't really a great deal you could do. You could just sit and wait, and he was being operated on. It was the spring, it come through the helmet, like this big thing, like huge thing, kilo weight.
And had you been told anything about his condition? Because I think the worst thing in this situation is, and you'll know this, the wildfire that spreads in the paddock. I mean, we were told on the BBC, don't repeat this, please, to the public, but that his life is really in danger here. He's,
Yeah.
This is a life-threatening accident.
Yeah, it was. So we got there, and like, thankfully, by some stroke of like luck, there's a military hospital in Budapest, and it has some of like the world's leading technology and doctors for head trauma. And so he got this guy who was amazing. But on that Saturday night, it was, he's in theatre, and, we don't really know whether he's going to make it.
My goodness.
Sorry. They put him in an induced coma. And then I think by the Sunday night, things were, he was a lot more stable, but it was still, he's still kind of touch and go. I went to the track on the Sunday. Probably shouldn't have done because I wasn't very present. But I went there to support the team. And then he slowly started to emerge. And I think at that point, if you've been through stuff like that, I think your first, there's always a lot of noise about, will he ever get back in a car? And you're kind of like, well, that's not important right now, right? Is he, his wife was pregnant with little Felipe. And it's like, is he going to make it? And then it's kind of like, you start to think like a long, long way down the line, like, will he get back in a car, and like, is it important anymore, and all the rest of it. And yeah, there's the funny, thankfully, part of the story was I went back to work. They flew. So Montezemolo, Luca di Montezemolo was the chairman of the team at the time, came over on the Sunday night, and then we spent the Sunday night in the hospital, and then the Monday, and it looked like, things were, he was more stable. He was critical but stable.
But you still couldn't have spoken to him after.
No. He was in an induced coma. So we flew back to Bologna, and then I went to work. Fairly difficult week at work, and then the following weekend, they flew me back out to Budapest. And when I went in the room, and by that point we knew he was out of the coma and he was like recovering. And I went in the room, and it was quite shocking to the point that it was funny, because his head was literally about twice the size of what it normally would be. And it was all black and blue. Yeah. Like literally his whole head was like black and blue. And he first started talking Portuguese to me. Then he didn't know I was. Then he thought he drove for McLaren. And then I think the next race was like in 2 weeks at that point, because it was the first of the summer break. So it was in 2 weeks. And then when he kind of worked out who I was and who he drove for, he kept saying to me, like, tell John I'll be back in the car, or Stefano. I think Stefano was in charge at that point. Like, give Stefano a ring and tell him I'll be back in the car next week. I can come testing on Monday. I'm feeling a lot better now. We were like, okay. So that was. We look back on that with fond amusement, but at the time horrendous, And thankfully for me, what happened was, there was the summer break, and actually I went with my family. I didn't want to travel. I was so tired of traveling, so we just went down to Dorset, and it was a typical summer holiday on a Dorset beach, like sat in your ski gear, laid on the beach. And I remember like thinking to myself, like, I don't know whether I want to do this anymore.
Really?
Yeah. It was quite an emotional time for me, and I just thought, I don't know whether I want to do it anymore, because, like, just as I'd gone through with Mini, this is a guy that I'd got very close to. We had and still have, like, almost like a family bond. Mm. And we're just at work doing our job. And then you think, you know, do you want to be involved in something where that can happen? And, you know, I come to the conclusion that I did want to do it. I wanted to carry on. And I'm glad I did, because I thoroughly enjoyed, like, you know, the remainder of my time in Formula One. But there was a lot of soul searching and a lot of talking, you know, and I was very clear with Ferrari as well. I said, I don't know whether I want to do it anymore.
And I guess what you're saying is, as any parent does before their child is born, you've already given them your heart and your love, right? And that your heart was broken when your daughter passed away. You then give your heart and your love to the driver because you didn't have a normal driver-engineer relationship. And again, the fear was that your heart could have been broken if you'd have lost Felipe, and this was just a price too much.
Yeah, totally. Like, why would, you know, like, nothing's worth that, right? Yeah. And that was kind of how I approached it. I didn't really. I had to do a lot of soul searching to see whether or not this was a job. Like, you don't want to go to work with the chance that, you know, you can lose a colleague. You know, of course, that's just can be life. Like, you know, your colleague goes under a bus, but, like, what's the heightened probability of this happening? Well, you know, it's much higher in Formula One. And am I ready to accept that? You know, is it worth that? And I come to the conclusion that I did want to carry on, and it was important to me. And as much as it was important to me, I also knew that he would want to come back, because I just know that the person that he is, and he did, and we carried on.
Emotional.
Very. Very. Yeah. Tough.
Yeah. And what was it like when he made the decision to come back? Because obviously you don't know if you're going to have the same racing driver. He doesn't know if he's going to be the same racing driver. The team don't know either. How did your relationship as engineer-driver change at that moment?
Well, I think the big unknown at that point is he, like, how much has it affected him?
Yeah.
How much has this put him on the back foot? Because we had, you know, up until that moment in qualifying in Budapest, we had the complete driver. So what's going to change when he comes back? And the reality was, you know, there was a lot of trepidation around that, and we set up some private tests for him. We did a private test at Fiorano, then we did a private test at Barcelona. And I can remember, you know, talking to Stefano Domenicali, who was the team principal at that point, and him saying to me, you know, what do you think? And, like, you know, like, keep me informed, and, like, you know, if you see anything different, because it's really important that we're honest about the situation, you know, for him and for the team and all the rest of it. And I can remember very distinctly, he went out on his first run, and I remember watching the telemetry, and we were, you know, I can't remember who the reference lap was, but there was some, like, fairly handy test driver, and I remember just watching him against the reference lap. I remember Stefano calling me during that very first run. I don't think he knew, like, where we'd be on the program, but we were actually in the middle of the first run, and Felipe hadn't even come back in. And he said to me, "Oh, what do you think? What do you think? Have you seen anything?" And I said, "No change. He's exactly, in terms of speed, he's exactly the same driver that he was." And he was, and it was kind of like, I think that then the environment that he came back into in 2010, you know, it was a team that, you know, Kimi had left, Fernando had come in. You know, it was less of an environment that was molded around him as it was at the end of, or in the middle of 2009, at the end of, like, 2008.
Yeah.
And I think that he perhaps, you know, struggled with that more than anything. But as a driver, as pure ability, there was no difference between the guy that, you know, before and after the accident.
Wow. I mean, was there a moment where physically he was able to do it again, but psychologically that was a barrier?
I think the psychology came into it, Jake, but not because of the accident. I think the psychology came into it because the team at that point was very much focused on Fernando.
Right.
You know, that was just like, how we were, and Fernando was a machine. Like Fernando at that point was like having Max in the car.
Yeah.
So of course they're gonna focus on that.
And of course, all this had happened while Felipe was away. Like
Yeah.
Kimi left and Fernando
Exactly.
arrived whilst
Yeah.
Felipe's recuperating, and suddenly things are different, right?
Things are different. You come into a different environment. It's exactly what we just talked about with Lewis. So you walk into a different environment. He'd come out of something that was very comfortable, that he had built around himself, and the team had obviously migrated towards him because he was the guy that was delivering. And then you come back into a very different environment and you're like, oh, this feels different and that relationship feels different. And like the focus is less, it's not 80% on me on it anymore. It's now, you know, it's even swayed the other way. And like, and all of those things are destabilizing. And that was probably the first time as a top driver that he'd had to go through that. And, you know, we spent a lot of time, and that was a difficult period for him, you know, that 10 and 11 season, you know, trying to get back on terms. And Fernando is a driver that, again, you know, he's a guy that I've got a huge amount of respect for. You know, as a competitor, he's very much like Max. He just brings it every single day. He never has a day off. And so coming into a different environment with a very, very fierce competitor, I think that's where the psychology played against Felipe in that period.
When you talk about Fernando being a fierce competitor, paint a picture around that for us. What does that look like in real terms that people like me and our audience could understand?
So you are fully focused on your mission of winning, you know, that Fernando Alonso wins the race. You know, Fernando comes into every single race weekend 100% focused on that mission, right? And 100% focused on the bigger prize as well, the World Championship. You have an inordinate amount of confidence, right? Not arrogance, confidence, because it's founded in fact.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a superficial thing. You just are very, very good at your job. And it's that motivation and focus on beating everybody, which, you know, unfortunately for Felipe also meant his teammate. It was very much trying to beat, you know, Seb and the Red Bulls at that point, but it was, you know, included everybody else. And, you know, he found himself that the team like rallied around him very quickly, and he found himself in an environment that really suited him. You know, he speaks perfect Italian, as does Felipe, by the way. But, you know, everything kind of worked around him. And then that, you know, little bit of success at the start of that trajectory, it's like we talked about before, like Nürburgring 06, it creates more success and it creates more momentum, and momentum is a drug and all the rest of it. And you just keep going and going and going till you've got this guy who, like Max Verstappen, you know, in 2025, is just a beast, right? He's just a winning machine. They never have a day off, right? They never give their competitors, you know, the tiniest of millimeters because they're just too strong, you know. And even if they do have, even if there are a few chinks in their armor, like because they're humans at the end of the day, they, you know, it's such a fleeting moment that, you know, everybody kind of rubs their hands together and say, oh, that's it, you know, now we're going to see the downward turn. And then the next, you know, the very next session or next race or next event or whatever, they're back. And then you're like, oh, fuck, when's this guy going to have a day off?
Was there a behaviour or a moment from Fernando that you saw and you thought, okay, that is an example of pure brilliance?
2012 Silverstone. We had a bit of a dog of a car, or it certainly wasn't the best car. It was a decent car, but not the best. It was damp. So, you know, tricky, changeable conditions. Start of the race, it was damp. He got away and he got in front, right? Which we shouldn't have been in front. I can't remember where we qualified, but it wasn't anywhere near the front. And we had kind of, on paper, no chance of winning the race. I remember around that first lap, just listening to some of the talk on the pit wall about, not like negative talk, but pragmatic talk about once the Red Bulls got in front and how we could like stay close to the Red Bulls. And I can remember kind of half listening to this, but watching him go around the lap and looking at his mini sectors and looking like, you know, because he always had to have his telemetry up as well as Felipe's telemetry and comparing them and thinking, I think this guy's going to run away with the race. I don't think you need to worry about when the Red Bulls get in front. And of course he did it. He just, the car was probably, you know, if it was anything, it was good enough for third. And he ran away and won the race at the canter, you know, like easily. He just dominated that day in a car that was nowhere near, you know, good enough to win. And I think there's moments like that when you see just pure brilliance, you know, when the driver outperforms the car. And that's, I think, you know, we don't see enough of those moments in Formula One, because usually it's the car that is all dominant, right? You know, Lewis won a lot of world championships. He was in the best car at the time. That's not to take anything away from Lewis. He's you know, one of the all-time greats. When you see a season like what Max has just done, where he's consistently outperforming the car, that's when you just see, you know, pure brilliance of these athletes. And that's what Formula One fans want, right? And me, like, I could almost watch that race, even though I was watching it from the Ferrari pit wall. You know, that's when you kind of know, you feel like a fan again, because you're just watching pure brilliance unfold in front of you. And he won the race. There's probably tons of incidents like that, but that was a big standout one.
And the most famous incident involving you, Felipe and Fernando, you know what that is, don't you?
I can't remember, Jake. Are you going to tell me?
Well, I'm hoping you'll tell me, because it'll be great in the trailer. The radio call, the famous radio call, which was...
Felipe, Fernando is faster than you. And a lot of people have that on their ringtones. Yeah. Especially when I'm at races, people go, "Oh, listen to my ringtone."
So this was at a time though when team orders weren't allowed, right?
Yeah.
So when someone says to you on the team, "Oh, by the way, can you just tell your driver to drop behind Fernando?" Before you deliver that very famous radio message, arguably one of the most famous ever in the sport, are you not having a battle on the pit wall to say, "No, that actually can't happen because it's against the rules," or "I refuse to do it because it's against sporting integrity," or "It doesn't feel right because I have a bond with the driver, you're asking, this is going to break him"?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, our mutual mate, DC, has, David Coulthard, for the non-F1 fans, has a very clear view on this, which I agree with. I don't think that should ever be delivered by the race engineer, right? I think that the race engineer's job there is to maximize the performance of their driver, right? And you can't ask them to do that for 6 days a week and then ask them to like deliver real bad news messages that, by the way, isn't like my decision on the 7th day of the week. So first of all, I would make that statement. I do agree with David on that. In that particular moment, look, I think that we all work for, like, when we all get paid, including the two drivers at the end of the month, it says Scuderia Ferrari on top of the paycheck, right? So that's a very clear covenant that we work for Ferrari. So it's not about like Felipe Massa, it's not about Fernando Alonso, it's not about Rob Smedley, it's not about anybody else, it's about Ferrari. But where I don't think we were very clear on that day was that was going to happen, right? And why that needed to happen. And I think that's where that was more what the conversation was based around on the pit wall.
So what were you saying to them?
Well, I was asking why we needed to do that, because, you know, at that point it was like, oh, he's a lot faster. So, you know, and then like I asked Felipe if he had any more pace, and he delivered a bit more pace, and I was like, it doesn't look like he's a lot faster. It just looks like Felipe's controlling the race at the front. And so this was like the conversation that was going on. And then in the end, you know, we decided that this was the message that had to be given. So I gave the message. But it is, I think it's very, you know, Felipe was very upset about it.
What did he say to you?
Yeah, he was... We had some choice words. I mean, he was super upset with everybody.
Was he upset with you?
Yeah, he was, because like I'd had to deliver the message. I was part of the team that had done that, and that's where I think that's the bit that I probably, you know, would disagree with. Then you go back and say, well, we were delivering at that point, you know, a message that perhaps wasn't within the sporting regulations. So it just played out in a bad way, right? It's one of those incidents that when I look back on it, there's a lot of things that I look back and I am human. I've been in high pressure situations, even not high pressure situations, and as a human I've fucked up, right, many times, right? And I look back on that and I go, that was great, because that was learning, and I wouldn't change a thing, right? Even the pain that I went through at the time, I think at that time it's one of those that you look back and just wish that we had all done it differently, that us as a team and the way the drivers were and the way that Felipe was and the way that I was and everything like that. It is the one professional time in life that you kind of look back and say, yeah, I wish we'd been able to do that one differently.
Would you do it again if you were put in that situation now? Would you just refuse to deliver the news?
I think if there was perfect sliding doors, we would have talked about it. We would have all understood what the situation was. That's actually, the outcome of the race, the outcome that we wanted as the company wanted. And at that point, when it's all clear and it's all communicated, there's what recourse is there? Let's just get on with it. Let's just deliver the plan. Whether or not that's Felipe wins or Fernando wins doesn't really matter. And we all know and we all go into it with our eyes wide open. I think that's what I would like to change when you go back. And then me delivering the message and executing the plan is much easier at that point. There's much less emotion to it. There's much less confusion to it.
And what about Fernando behind closed doors after that moment? Because that's also a fascinating insight into the mindset of a world champion.
Yeah, I think Fernando at that point, I remember talking to him very briefly, afterwards, like after the race, and then I think wherever the next race was, we were chatting, and I think he even came to the factory and we were chatting about it as well. Fernando is very good at, like I talked about before, when you have kind of releasing that pressure, of that negative pressure at least. Fernando is impervious to that as an athlete. He never feels that, right? As long as he's got the people around him that he needs, which doesn't always have to include the team, by the way, from what I've observed. He's totally impervious to it. So Fernando was like, to him it was like, I don't even know what we're talking about. Like, what really? We're even discussing? Like, did that happen? He's just on to the next thing. He just wants to win.
So he wasn't like apologetic or anything, like, oh, I'm really sorry this had to happen.
No, as far as he was concerned, the team had made a decision. He was a part of that execution, like, everybody else was part of the execution of that plan, and he just did his part, and Felipe did his part, and I did my part, and like, what are we even talking about? Let's focus on winning the next race.
It'd be very different if it had been Felipe overtaking Fernando, I bet you.
I think so.
And was he a contracted number one driver, Fernando, at Ferrari?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that.
I bet you could if you wanted.
No,
I bet you asked the question though.
Well, of course I asked the question, and the answer that I always got very, very clearly was, no, he's not. Like, we've got two equal drivers. Like, everything is equal between the drivers. But whether or not the contract said something different, I don't know that because I never saw them.
What do you suspect?
I suspect that we did actually have two contracts that were fair to both drivers. I suspect that. But I suspect also that Fernando, given his brilliance, there was a natural tendency to want to, get him as many points as possible, knowing that we probably didn't have the fastest car, to give ourselves the best chance of winning the World Championship. And I think that then puts the team in a very difficult situation, because how do you keep your other driver motivated, knowing that every point on the table has to go to the other guy, regardless of whether you're having a great day or not, and regardless of whether it's race 1 or race 18. We're kind of going into this season knowing that we've got to back one of you, because we don't have the car that we can just let it battle out like McLaren did in 25. And the one that we've chosen is Fernando. So I suspect that's probably how it went down. But I don't know because, I was too busy doing my job to kind of worry about that from that point on.
And of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression that Felipe would have thought, hold on, I've nearly delivered you a world title, did everything I could have done. I've almost died in the car to be successful for Ferrari. I've gone away, done everything I can to get back to being the best Formula 1 driver I can. And now I've come into a team where I'm being treated in a different way. Is that a good summation of what Felipe's mindset would have been at that time?
That is a good summation of what his mindset was, definitely.
So what did you then do to keep him operating at the very best that he could?
I think what we did was we kind of went back to basics because what started to happen to Felipe in that moment was he started to he started to overdrive. He started to overthink. He started to try and rage against the machine, if you like. And it was kind of like taking it back to basics with him again. It was almost like an 06 moment where let's get it back to basics. Let's start to deliver on what we can deliver, and let's start to build this back up to something that is going to be where we can get you back on a much more even keel. It's about a lot of times in life. It's about not trying to control the things that you can't control. If everybody is it's the most popular kid at school, right? You can't control that everybody else, thinks the most popular kid at school is the most popular kid at school. As all you can do is do your best, right? Or the kid who, at school who gets all the favors off the teachers, right? You can't control that. You can't control like what they're doing. You can only control what you're doing. And it was a lot of, talking with him professionally and as a friend about that type of stuff. And also like technically like bringing it back to basics, right? Okay, let's stop over trying here. Because, the more, we're already trying at 120% and it's not working. And so now you're going to try 125% and it's going to work even less. Let's just try and get it back to working at 10/10. So yeah, there was a lot of that went on, and it's moments like that, like we talked about before, like what's the psychology between the technical coaching and the psychological coaching. Definitely in moments like that, you're almost 80% psychology, 80-90%, some days 100%, because that your biggest performance center at that point is the driver. And if you can get the driver back on track, whether the car's like 1 or 2 tenths faster or whether or not he's optimized with that car and blah, 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 that's like much less important to where the driver's at right now.
I can't let you go without talking about two things. The first one is you then, after leaving Ferrari, went to Williams.
Yeah.
And the team was struggling, regularly finishing 10th in the championship battle. You go and suddenly you're right at the centre, if not the front of the midfield, just behind the biggest teams. What did you see at Williams when you arrived? And I know this is tricky in a couple of minutes, but the sort of the message you gave them that you think made the biggest difference. And maybe we should do part 2 of this podcast at some point and go a bit deeper on this.
Yeah, I'd be up for that. So what I saw, the biggest thing that I saw is that they weren't being honest with themselves. Right. The bit that I wanted to get sorted as soon as possible was how we operated at the track. And I saw that it was a team that was not particularly honest with themselves, and the most stark presentation of that to me was my second race, which was the Chinese Grand Prix, and we did a 60-second pit stop. And I always flippantly describe it as like watching Morris dancing. I mean, it was awful. It was awful. And I remember sitting on the pit wall thinking, what the fuck have I done here, right? You come from Ferrari where like, you might not have the capability within the car, but every year there's an expectation you can win the world championship to a team that had finished 10th and 11th or something in the past 3 years. And now I'm looking at this pit stop thinking, oh my God. And what I found from that was really like a catalyst for me, because I started to talk to all the individual stakeholders in the factory and in the race team and like say like, why do you think we did a 60-second pit stop? And all of them were very clear that the bit that they were responsible for was great, right? Wow. But there was something else somewhere else in the ether where it hadn't worked, and that's why we've done a 60-second pit stop. And you go back to basics and just pare it back and say, like, guys, like, what are we trying to achieve here? Are we trying to achieve our individual targets that I've designed the best wheel nut, or, you know, I've delivered the best wheel gun or something? Or are we trying to do the fastest pit stop? Because that's what's important here. And if we want to do that, we've got to be really honest with ourselves that we're just a bit shit, right? And that's not to say that, you know, that's a really flippant comment, we're a bit shit. But we're certainly not at the level of where the top teams are. Yeah. And then, you know, that was kind of a microcosm, I think, of how we operated as a team. And it was like, let's just be honest with each other. It's fine that we make mistakes, right? This is a really high pressure environment, but let's create a psychologically safe environment where we will be, you know, we will be praised as individuals for holding our hand up and go, oh, I made a mistake here. Please note that down, because we don't want to do that again. And that's what we did. We just started to work from, you know, on the technical delivery of the weekend, of the team itself. We started to be very open and honest with each other. Like when we made mistakes, like, you know, it was almost a culture like 6 months in where people were like, you know, couldn't wait to like be the one that were, well, I made the biggest mistake. You know, I made the biggest fuck up during the weekend. And by the way, like when there's a mistake like that, it's never, you always get the poor woman or man holding the hot potato, right? But there's always a chain of like 100 events that has brought them to like this person holding the hot potato. And that could have started like 4 weeks ago. So that was another, like, you know, let's start attacking the source problem, not like blaming the guy who's holding the hot potato. So it was just a lot of like creating, like trying to gel the team, trying to bring like more technology and more technical excellence, but creating that culture that we got to be honest with each other, right? If we're not honest, we're never going to like move out of where we are. So that was a really interesting couple of years. And yeah, we had some good results. Certainly, I think, and I'm sure James will be upset with me saying this, but James Vowles, who's the current team principal, the most successful period in Williams since 97. So there you go.
You did okay. And your focus now, for people who are thinking, I'd love to see Rob Smedley back in Formula One, either on a pit wall or in some kind of leadership role. What fills your time now is based around what you learned and what you garnered in Formula One. But I think from the time that we spent together today, fulfills you in a different way maybe to how Formula One did.
Yeah, when I knew that it was time for me to step back from Formula One. I didn't know whether I wanted to retire from it fully, but I knew it was time to step back because I wasn't as motivated by it as I had been, and that was around like 2017, 2018. And I thought, to be fair to my employers and everybody else, it's time to step back. I'm not coming to make up the numbers. I'm not coming to do Formula One. It doesn't interest me. So I stepped back. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but what I had been like incredibly fortunate from the background from where I'm from. I'd been like really fortunate to have this amazing career. And I wanted to find some way to give back. And that's where the whole karting league started. And to bring that level of, you know, everything that we've talked about in this podcast, all of that focus, all of that, you know, continuous improvement, that culture of excellence that exists in Formula One. How do you bring that down to the grassroots? How do you change it? How do I go from like 1,000 kids involved in karting because it's so expensive? How do I change the system to get literally hundreds of thousands of kids involved, which we've got now? And that's what I'm focused on. So, you know, Fat Karting League, which is, I run it in collaboration with my business partner, Ferdy Porsche of the Porsche family. It's a fun thing to do. It's a fun thing to get kids into the sport. But I think I'm taking everything that Formula One has taught me over a long career in Formula One and applying it down at the grassroots. And that's not normal, right? People don't step out of Formula One and go, well, I'll go back to the very beginning, the very lowest tier of motorsport. But for me, it's like super fulfilling. Like, will I come back to Formula One? I think I will at some point. I think I'm a little bit too old now to do the old race engineer, chief engineer, head of performance bit. And maybe can bring a little bit more to that. I think that I would come back, has to be on my terms. Yeah. And I don't want to sound like a twat by saying that. I don't mean to sound like a twat. but it needs to be on my terms. It needs to be a project that I'm interested in, and I need to have some ownership as well. I can't just come and work with somebody, not after working for myself for 5 years. Yeah. I'm unemployable.
Well, join the club. It's been great to sit down and chat. I've got such fond memories of our time together, and thank you so much for being so honest, so open, and giving us such amazing value. It was fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I've loved it. Top man, Rob. Thank you, mate.